Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Kickstox Sessions, where we sit down with industry professionals to get some more in-depth insights and an analytical view into the world of professional sports. Today, we're going to be covering technology and innovation, and we're probably joined by the perfect guest to discuss the topic with us. Jean-Baptiste Alliot is co-founder and chief strategic officer at La Source, a B2B company agency based in Paris, focused on sport, digital, and technological transformation. Most notably, however, Jean-Baptiste also serves as the head of innovation strategy for UEFA's very own Innovation Hub, as well as being both a startup mentor and a judge for multiple innovation hubs and investment firms worldwide. So he's very kindly agreed to come on the pod with us today to give us an insight into life at European football's governing body, discuss the world of sports startups, and of course, highlight some future trends in innovation to look out for in the near future. So JB, it's a pleasure to have you with us.
Thanks, guys. Thanks for having me, James and Victor.
No problem. Just before we get started as well, I have to give you kudos for coming on the pod today because you're a notoriously busy guy. So first things first, how do you find enough hours in the day to keep up with all the projects you've currently got going on? I mean, what I'm trying to ask essentially is, do you have a life?
Yeah, actually, I just had a baby born. So I have a new kid of 3 months. So
Congratulations.
I'm still managing my time between UEFA, between the source and actually my own private family life. So that's okay, I think.
So anyways.
Exactly. I mean, at the end of the day, it's more like passion. If you're passionate about what you do, you don't really count the time or what you do. But let's say I need to, just like in innovation, you need to process everything. So it's just finding the time when you want to do sports, when you need to take the time with your family and when you want to dedicate time really to go into more details in certain initiatives. But no, that's all right. Still managing it and happy to be on the podcast with you guys.
Well, good to hear. Glad to hear it. I imagine sleep is at a premium, so but you're looking sprightly, so that's good. But it's nice that you mentioned passion because actually that's a really good place to start because what I'm curious about with regards to, before we dive into sports innovation industry trends, I'm curious as to how you fell into the world of sports in the first place. Have you always been passionate about sports? Because as I understand it, you were working more in international relations before you kind of started in the sports industry, correct?
Yeah, so I mean, I've always practiced sports, not necessarily football. I mean, I started with football, but I extensively played tennis when I was younger. But like you said, I mean, my studies were more around political sciences. And actually, the first internships I did was around public affairs in the US or Australia or even with NGOs. So that was not necessarily directly related to sports, actually. But it was more a passion of mine. Like this is really something like from my family and from my friends. Like always been around with the ball or practicing or running somewhere. So that's more of a personal thing, and I think that was one of the passions. And at the end of the university and the master's degree, like I wanted to work in the international space, but also maybe around something that I like and that I want to spend time on. And so that's why I tried to find a first internship, which is in between European or public affairs and related to sports. So that's a bit how I started because I didn't really study to work in sports. And I think that's also something, I don't know if it's on the podcast, it's a recommendation or anything, but I think, I mean, we can see more and more masters specializing in sports. That's good, but I would not say that you need 5 years dedicated to have a full master program in sports to be working in sports and to be relevant.
Interesting. So moving on then, of course, from the world obviously of from your passion to actually sports startups. So I'm curious, I mean, sports startups right now, is the industry booming at the moment? It seems like there's new companies popping up left, right, and center. And obviously it's been a tough time, especially in the last 12 months, given COVID, but it hasn't all been bad, has it? I mean, has COVID made, sports startups have to be even more innovative than before?
Okay, on the booming, if we take it, I think there's always been a boom, and I would say the last decade. I don't know if you're talking Europe or in the US or worldwide, but clearly in the US, you can see the trends for the last 10 years. In Europe, over the last years, it is clearly booming, not at the same scale. I think if you relate to the short-term period of time, so the last year was COVID, you can see definitely a boom, but I think this is also mainly due to the liquidity on the market. So this has nothing really to do with sports, but it's more general macroeconomic trends where, you know, the public states have been like recovery plan, central banks, European or in the US have been massively spending money. You can see that on the capital market or investment. There is a lot of liquidities, and you've got a lot of financial schemes that can allow them to be quite aggressive on the market. I mean, everybody's talking about SPACs for the last, I don't know, 10, 12 months while no one knew about it. So it's just mechanisms that were already there or were to do it. But I would say the pandemic has just reinforced or has put different parameters aligned to get like things moving as well. Everything was shut down, but at the same time, you never had that much liquidity on the market. And while you have this amount to be invested in, and you have an economy and people suffering from an economic downturn, you can see also opportunities arising. So this is why I think, especially in the venture capital, you could see that in the past 12 months, it has been clearly booming. But I would say, just like what I've explained to different people recently, it's, I think for me, and you can take it for any other industry, just not sports, but COVID-19 has just been an acceleration of current trends. So whether it is in health or whether it is in other industries, but for sports it's the same. Is like, okay, we knew the trends, we knew the pain points, we knew also the opportunities that lie ahead, but COVID-19 has just like given a strong push to all of this, whether good or bad. And it's just why I think there is like a dimension where it's exploding, and people are now investing in startups and everything because they are looking at the next opportunities or the shifts, which are becoming more and more relevant or more and more real in terms of like consuming habits. Not just consuming, but also the way you engage, the way you watch, even the way you practice because you're at home. I mean, even the way you do your grocery, it's like now it's more online. So all these trends have been just accelerated. And when you are an investor and you see that 10, 20 or 30% of these habits will remain for most of the population, then this means you need to invest or you need to go into other directions. And that's why I think it has been booming in sports.
It's interesting you say that, Jean-Baptiste, because you actually were taking the words out of my mouth, because the whole Corona, I mean, obviously it affected many factors in the world, but especially the sports industry was hit hard, and it forced, I totally agree with you, it forced startups to think differently, because there was a new problem that had to be solved. And you mentioned a couple already, you know, digital engagement was a huge one, with fans not being able to go to the stadium. How are they going to stay connected and interacted with their club, with their team, with the sport that they love? So there was definitely a sudden need for sports startups to be more innovative and to really solve a problem which actually was probably something they never thought of in the first place.
I think it was there. I think for me, the thing is like, even when we started, so the innovation journey officially was launched at UEFA back in late 2018, but we started the journey end of 2016, 17. So, and even back then, like you can see in the US and Europe, most of the sports organizations are thinking about, okay, how do I engage with the fans? How can I think about loyalty program as well to be applied to sports? And so that's not new. I mean, that was like, if you're working on your CRM, if you're working, because you're mentioning more the fan engagement side of things, you need to understand your fans. And that's not something new. I mean, sports organizations were already thinking about it, but I think like for any other industry where you speak about digital transformation to a certain extent, it's okay. I think the last year has given maybe like in 1 year, we've condensed maybe 3 years of what was presented. And if you think one of the things is for Disney Plus to reach 100 million subscribers in nearly like almost a year, while it should have been, or the target was 2024, it just gives you also like, okay, people, the trend has just been accelerated. And I'm not saying it's good, it's just the way it is. And so the way you will need to rethink or deliver value for your stakeholders or for the fans, ultimately, you need to rethink that as well.
So it's quite a diverse industry, the startup sector. But look, you're a man who's been around the block. You're a startup mentor and a judge for multiple organizations. So what do you look for in a successful sports startup?
Whoa, good questions. On that one, I think it depends a bit the stage of the startup, but if you're looking more into, again, like venture capital, so more and the more early, the more true, I think is, nothing new here, the team. For me, it's even with a shitty product at the beginning or with even a shitty communication or whatever, I think if the team or if the expertise around the table is good, for me, the team is the number one. Then after, obviously, you, based on what the Innovation Hub needs, or depending on the different clients' needs, when you do the sourcing and the screening of the startup, you also need to understand the strategic fit. You need also to understand the different timelines. So there are different aspects in terms of, okay, how can that work within the organization or within the client's perspective and within the startups? And that's why for me, the team is crucial, because adaptation or flexibility from them in terms of like morphing your product or your vision into what can be a market reality and drive value. This is what is the most important to me. And I think one thing that I'm still trying to work on and to make that work is also trying to have startups that have an impact or that tries to drive change, and so that to a certain extent help sports organizations as well to change in terms of like sustainability or positive impact, like football for good or sports for good in general, in terms of, okay, maybe startups, they can also come with a value proposition in terms of being more sustainable or being more diverse or applying good governance principles that actually help sports organizations to also like bridge the gap on where they are. So, but that's something more on the personal side that I'm still trying to find like the right approach to. But the team is definitely my number one.
Do you quick question? Do you see yourselves as and I'm sure we'll talk about UEFA Innovation Hub in more detail right after this, but do you see the UEFA Innovation Hub as kind of a bridge between professional organizations such as clubs and startups, that you can bring them together and find solutions for problems they have, maybe?
I would reply to you saying not entirely. While this might be a portion of what we do, being an interface between the internal UEFA and the external world, but this is not, the core nature of the UEFA Innovation Hub is actually to help the organization, so UEFA, to implement its strategic initiatives. So we have a strategy for 2024. We know where we want to go. We know where we want to be. We want to grow the game in terms of participations. We want to have a competitive balance at the competition level. We know we want to increase fan engagement. And the Innovation Hub is just here to say, okay, we're going to help the organization to achieve these goals. And so part of the objectives and the activities we do is related to leveraging the ecosystem and maybe morphing or shaping the ecosystem, but leveraging it. Startup is part of it, but there are also SMEs. You also have research centers. You have a plurality of different stakeholders and partners, which is not necessarily only limited to startups. Startups are gaining in traction, they are sexy. They also allow you to be a bit more flexible or agile. So clearly they are part of the equation. But I would say it's not the main, it's one of the important components, but it's not the main components. We also, I don't want to go too much into details because we don't have much time, but there's also a whole, the number one focus, if you want to know, of the Innovation Hub is more internal. So my goal is actually to foster a culture of innovation within UEFA. So my goal is to a certain extent, is a bit of business transformation or change management. Ultimately, I would love that I'm no longer needed. I should become useless in the next 2 to 3 years, so that all my colleagues at UEFA, they don't need the UEFA Innovation Hub. They are their own innovators and they know and they have the framework to actually with startups or in an innovative way. Some business units already do it, and some divisions are quite proactive and we are working well together. But still, I mean, at the end of the day, we need to embark and to try to help this internal mindset, I think.
So fascinating that we're talking about the UEFA Innovation Hub now. That was going to be my next question, but Victor beat me to it. But nice little segue, because I'm kind of curious as to what is the UEFA Innovations Hub's view on information sharing. I mean, I think the network and community of innovation hubs throughout the world are predominantly about, you know, disseminating as much information as possible to benefit the wider industry. Has that always been the case at UEFA as well?
Yeah, so on that one, the thing is yeah, that's true. We always said like innovation is a team sport. Ultimately, I cannot innovate on my own, or UEFA cannot innovate on its own. We have to be also conscious of our innovation capabilities internally. And so we need partners. And we, even within our own core ecosystem with federations or with clubs, we need also stadium owners. We need other partners to actually test or to use different products and to make innovation happen. So I think it has always been core, and what we've done since the beginning is to work or to initiate some of the clusters. So we've done in the US, we are part of the RGA Global Sports Venture Studio since the beginning, working with different entities in the US. But in Europe, we've also launched what we call the Football Innovation Cluster. And that actually came, and I think you have some Dutch folks that I can name here, because on the Reimagine Football initiative we've done together, you have also KNVB, so the Dutch FA, and the Johan Cruyff Arena with Sander and Giel, for which they are key partners. And I think here, learning from them learning from us on different topics, but also seeing how we can source, potentially pilot together, open our competition, open their stadium, open their grassroots players to different projects we have, because we're facing the same challenges. That's clearly core to any innovation initiative. So clearly knowledge sharing has always been at the start. I think we're going to scale with the federations, because UEFA Innovation Hub has always been primarily centered for UEFA strategic initiatives. But ultimately, we want to serve our members, which are the federations in Europe. And so we're going to try to foster a relationship there.
Yeah, no, that makes perfect sense. And then just very briefly then on that, before we move on to looking at more industry-wide trends, are there any real life sort of tangible examples of technological developments or releases that UEFA have, I guess, released in the last couple of years that have been born out of its innovation hub, that some of the listeners or viewers might, you know, relate to or have heard of before?
Yeah, so we've been working, we do not necessarily develop directly the product, or at the moment we don't even when we work with startup, we don't take equity. We don't, this is not something we can do at the moment, given that we are non-for-profit and we have a specific legal status. But when we engage with startups, we don't also want to own the IP. What we want to do is to make sure we have a product that can actually serve us. So based on the different, we did a startup challenge back in 2019. We had contracts with 6 startups out of 7. 5 of them are still working, are still active. So What can I mention? We had the WSC, but the easy one because I think they are working with most of the sports organization in terms of automated highlights. Live Light, we worked early on their new product, not the VR one, but the engagement one, especially around UEFA TV. And now they've been working a lot with our official broadcasters and broadcast partners for Champions League, for instance, in terms of having widgets and second screen app and all that. I can mention from analytics and Kicks as well that are still in the pipeline. Second Spectrum for the women's Champions League, the tracking aspect of things. With open innovation, we have engaged with different startups. For the Euro 2020, we're gonna activate, for instance, with Greenfly in terms of creating and sharing content on social media. Slate is another one. Recently, on sports performance, we started to have different look at potential startups or solution providers. Right now, we're gonna start actually. I think I can name it because we will always have some clauses of confidentiality or stuff like that. But we're gonna start a pilot with Los Angeles Football Club with Uplift Lab. So as part of our Global Sports Venture Studio, looking at player development pathways, also at academies. It's also like remote coaching. So we've had quite a lot of different startups and projects going on that I can relate to. And it's also, I have to be honest, like other colleagues have also been innovating with us being much into the mix. We've been there. We've been discussing with them that they have been able to launch the product, like the new ticketing solution for the Euro will be on blockchain technology. And that's something we do our service providers. So I think we have quite a lot of different examples on where we can be quite innovative and working with startups.
Brilliant, perfect. I just want to quickly move on then to industry trends. And also, obviously, since this is a podcast, supported by Kickstox, we have a particular interest as well in fantasy sports, fantasy football in particular. Is this a space where you're seeing a lot of innovation as well and a lot of growth?
Yeah. I mean, one of the main vertical. I mean, if you think as sports and entertainment within an ecosystem where you have sports performance and so health, fitness related to it, data, or fan engagement, there is clearly one whole world or one vertical around, and I will not call it necessarily, fantasy is just a part of it, but it's gaming. So gaming is clearly something around the phygital, so between the physical, digital, and everything you've seen with mixed reality, augmented reality, and so how all these gaming industries work for sports organizations. How do our IPs live into such worlds, or how does that work? And I think in terms of like one of the key growth or key vertical or segment to look at is really gaming around, people might be familiar with the metaverse. So how do you create new experiences, new ways to actually engage with fans? And so sports will definitely be part of it. So the idea is more how do you structure that so that it benefits also what we want to achieve. Ultimately, we still want people to be playing football, like I was saying, being young boys or young girls, and how the metaverse can help us do that. That's really something we're looking at. For sports organizations, it started with esports, which is the professional aspect of things into gaming. So esports is like professional team, while gaming is more the grassroots and it's more for everyone. So we've always, the entry door is through esports, but and fantasy is also a way to enter into gaming. But I think sports organizations still need to figure out the best way in terms of how this works for them and this can work for, I mean, we can see the investments into esports or into gaming, we can see the boom around those, but I think no one has really still figured out the best way or the best like holistic approach to this, which actually will be the future. If you want me to be a bit more futuristic here, it's like, how all this come together in terms of a transmedia or omni-channel world where you are within the metaverse, if you want, where fantasy, but the gaming at large will be part of, or football will be part of it to a certain extent. So that's a bit futuristic, but that's the way I'm looking at it.
Yeah, no, it's interesting you say that, because we had Kickstox where we saw a huge opportunity was that you had these three industries in transition, and combined it kind of made the perfect storm, right? So you had the clubs and the media companies who were really looking for that extra fan engagement and wanted to connect more with that fan. You had the technological side of it. You know, everything is mobile now. Everything is a second screen experience now, and all that together. And you have the data available that enables fancy games and other games and other areas as well to excel. So all that together for us created a perfect storm to bring out this fancy. And do you see that the necessity for technological advancements is key when you look at these startups or companies or you partner with?
Yeah, I mean, ultimately we all rely on the advancements of the tech, and I can say, like, into this world, this is moving quite fast. It's also the price entry point for the way augmented reality will become something which is accessible to everyone and which is not like still a pain for the end user of using it. So clearly advancement in technology is clearly something that will allow sports organizations to actually enter more with tech or data partners in terms of how do we leverage that with new experiences. I'm still thinking like sports organizations should be pioneers of entertainment. And so this will only be possible thanks to technology or thanks to new network. So the latency, the capacity to reshape a world or to have this kind of mixed reality is still not there yet from a purely processing and technology standpoint, but with new advancement in terms of machine learning, and I think also in terms of network with 5G, that could be something that could be a bit more real in the coming months. But on what you just said, I think the key thing around fantasy, and I think that's something that is key for you. I mean, for any sports organization, it's around the data. So data is the new oil. We all know that. Data becomes crucial, or that's a must. You need to be to realize that for everything you do, you need to be data centric. And fantasy game, to a certain extent, or what it allows sports organizations or any other organization, is actually to collect first party data to know better your fans. So that's allowing you and your partners to actually shape or build products, not necessarily into the gaming, but more on all the other aspects, but that allows you to understand the fans at the end of the day. And so fantasy game is a way for which we see in general, fantasy games are the ones where the recurrence and the level of engagement is the highest. That's for sure. But the data the insights you can have once you have structure and analyze the data are quite, I think, fundamental in terms of even delivering value for partners. So as we're moving from sponsorship to partnership, it's also like we could tell in certain territories, okay, the players that are the most appreciated or that are the most played with are XXX for this territory. And so when you are talking to the broadcast partner in this territory, you can tell him, hey, you know what? There's a game around the Europa League where this player is actually part of the team and he has a huge into this territory. Might be a good thing to actually put it prime time if you don't have any particular interest. So this is the kind of insights where what you get from the gaming or from some of the fantasy games that you have can actually nurture into like decision making into other areas where you provide value to your partners. And it's not necessarily purely just like, okay, conversion rates into the game or this kind of thing. It's also like insights. For sports organization, it's more insights on, okay, how do people interact, or how do they live with the football product to a certain extent?
Yeah, no, it's interesting because you see it in the US as well, because all these fancy operators, they really partner with the leagues as well as the media companies, right? So it's also kind of a trifecta, because everyone adds value to each other. So it's interesting.
That's the goal. The only thing is, like, you need to have the proper setup in place. When you're a sport organization and you are not born in the 21st century, you need to make sure since scratch, like, okay, my infrastructure, my tech stack needs to be agile enough to actually be compliant with all of this. Otherwise, it's cool, but you will always be relying on external service providers, or you will not be able to actually collect, structure, and analyze the data. So that's something also, before going too far on certain products and consumer-facing app, you also need to have the backend engine and the understanding on, okay, what do I want to achieve? How is it going to serve my strategy? What do I want to do with that? And then if it's working with media partners or other partners to achieve this, then that's great. But we need to make sure this becomes first party data. We need to make sure there's all that in place, and in Europe also the GDPR environment. So that's not an easy also thing to activate when you think of it in a more holistic way.
Yeah, exactly.
That's brilliant. Fantastic. I feel like we're getting our own little private consultancy session here. So this is absolute gold. Very quickly then, just because I'm conscious of time, JB, I wanted to ask you, the way it seems to me is that at the moment, sports innovation is really broken down into three key pillars, which is fan engagement, player performance, and stadium experience. Very briefly, in a nutshell, for each one of those pillars, what fundamental changes do you see happening in the next 5 to 10 years? What are we to look out for?
Okay, I think I would merge maybe the fan engagement and the stadium experience, where I would combine the two, where I would say entertainment at large, so pioneers of entertainment. And here I'm thinking mixed reality, AR, MR. I'm thinking more data, AI, and machine learning. So it's like buzzwords, but it's more technologies that will allow new ways to engage with fans, being at home, remotely, or being in physical spaces. So it's a new immersive experience that you will see coming in the next decade in terms of, okay, how do we merge, how technology would allow us to have a more personalized, more interactive, and a more immersive experience, being at home or being in a physical space, so at the stadium or somewhere else. And maybe you could even imagine not necessarily being at the stadium, but being physically somewhere with other people, 2,000, 5,000, but living it as if you were first row somewhere else. That's really something that I see coming in the decade, and that's really about personalization, interactivity, and immersive. The only thing is, given the pandemic, I think we are human beings. So everything remote or everything digital is not something like, we are all tired of Zoom. We are all tired and we want to be in bars and we want to sit with friends and we want to live and we want to be social. We are social animals. So it's just like how you improve the physical experience into something bigger. So that's trying to be short. I would say that's what I see coming onto the fan experience and stadium or at home thing. On sports performance, it's more around, I would see it more, sports performance is key for any sports organization. The impact I see on the industry and the future that you are mentioning too is more around health and well-being. So here it's just like everybody, I think it's how sports can play a huge part in terms of finding the right product and improving the product that can after be sold D2C, so direct to consumer, based on elite performance. So you can use the clubs, the federation as labs in terms of improving human performance, injury prevention, and all the learnings from it, you can have it for society, and that's what's coming. So like the watches or the Whoop of this world where you measure your sleep, wellness. I think this is more the health wellness industry that's going to be driven, and where I see massive growth, to be honest. And the last one, it's more, and I think it's not just for you, but it's around the gaming. So in relation to the first one around the new immersive and the new engagements and the new entertainment, gaming on its own will play a huge role. And here I see really new rules of like the metaverse. Before it becomes a reality, it will be tough. But what you've seen with Roblox, to a certain extent, with this new generation, and this generation coming to more maturity in the next 10 years and becoming the new, let's say, adults in the 5 to 10 years, I think you will see this, like these worlds where you allow people to create and where they live in. And this is something that we need to look at in terms of trends or big focus for me.
Fascinating. Awesome. I mean, look, it's so interesting, honestly, that we could talk about this all day. Sadly, for time reasons, I'm probably going to have to bring it to a close there. Vic, unless you've got any closing comments?
No, I think, like you say, I could sit for hours and listen to your thoughts, because, I mean, innovation is needed. It's everywhere. And especially in an industry which I'm personally passionate about, which we are all, sports, it's fascinating to hear. Thank you a lot for your insights.
Yeah. Exactly. And obviously, look, innovation by its nature is changing all the time. So hopefully, JB, we'd love to have you back sometime, maybe in the near future, once everything in the sports industry is turned on its head.
Yeah. Thanks, guys. Thanks. I hope I didn't talk too much. Thanks for having me.
Perfect. Brilliant. Thank you. And best of luck with all your ventures. And see you around.
See you around.
Bye.